In the early 19th century, Edinburgh and London were the absolute capitals of global medical science. Thousands of ambitious young students flooded into elite universities and private anatomy schools, eager to learn the secrets of human biology from the world's most brilliant surgeons. But as the medical schools expanded, they ran into a desperate, grotesque problem. To teach surgery, doctors needed human corpses. And in Great Britain, human bodies were strictly illegal to buy or sell. By law, the only legal anatomical supply came from the gallows, the executed bodies of convicted murderers. But as execution rates dropped, the demand for fresh corpses skyrocketed. A black market emerged in the cold, damp graveyards of Britain. Under the cover of pitch-black nights, teams of ruthless grave robbers armed with shovels, sacks, and crowbars slipped over churchyard walls. They were known as Resurrectionists, or simply the Resurrection Men. They dug up freshly buried graves, dragged out decaying bodies, and sold them to prestigious medical professors for small fortunes. When robbing graves wasn't producing enough bodies fast enough, two men in Scotland decided to skip the graveyard entirely. They realized that waiting for people to die was far too slow. They would help the process along. Tonight, we step into the foggy, lantern-lit alleyways of 19th century Britain to uncover the shocking story of grave robbing, anatomical madness, and the serial murders that built modern medical science. Welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Are you ready to look into the grave? To understand how doctors ended up buying murder victims, you first have to understand the nightmare of 18th and 19th century grave robbing. Surgery at the time was evolving rapidly. Medical pioneers realized that to perform successful amputations, stop internal bleeding, and understand disease, students had to perform hands-on dissections. Because British law only permitted the bodies of executed criminals to be used on the dissecting table, medical schools faced an artificial famine. A single anatomy professor might need dozens of corpses every semester for his students, but the courts were only handing down a handful of executions a year. Enter the Resurrection Men. Grave robbing was not a job for the faint-hearted. It required speed, precision, and complete cold-heartedness. Resurrectionists worked in teams of 3 or 4. They would scout churchyards during the daytime, looking for fresh mounds of earth indicating a recent burial. They returned at midnight, rather than digging up the entire grave, which took too long and left obvious signs. They developed a terrifyingly efficient technique. They would dig a small shaft directly over the head of the wooden coffin, smash the top of the lid open with a crowbar, tie a rope around the corpse's neck or under its arms, and haul the body out onto the grass. They would strip the corpse completely naked, leaving all clothes, jewelry, and personal items back in the grave. Why? Because under British law, stealing property like clothing was a felony punishable by transportation or hanging. But stealing a human body? In the eyes of 18th century law, a corpse belonged to no one. It was merely a misdemeanor punished by a light fine or a few months in jail. The snatched body was shoved into a burlap sack or a wooden crate, loaded onto a horse-drawn cart, and delivered straight to the back doors of university anatomy rooms before dawn. While resurrection gangs prowled the cemeteries of London, the dark climax of the trade unfolded in Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1827. At the center of this story were two Irish immigrants, William Burke and William Hare. Neither man started out as a grave robber. Hare ran a cheap, run-down lodging house in the impoverished Westport district of Edinburgh, and Burke lived there as a boarder with his mistress. In late November 1827, an elderly pensioner living in Hare's lodging house died of natural causes, leaving behind an unpaid debt of £4. To recover the money, Hare and Burke decided to sell the old man's body to Dr. Robert Knox, one of the most famous and popular private anatomy lecturers in Edinburgh. Dr. Knox's assistants paid the duo £7, an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to several months of hard manual labor. Knox's team gave Burke and Hare a clear message. If they ever came across more fresh bodies, they would always find a well-paying buyer. The easy money ignited a dark, terrifying greed in both men. They waited for another lodger to get sick, but when no one died fast enough, they decided to take matters into their own hands. In early 1828, Burke and Hare committed their first murder. They targeted a sick lodger named Joseph the Miller. They invited him to drink heavy quantities of cheap whiskey until he was unconscious. Once Joseph was helpless, Hare pressed his hands over the victim's nose and mouth, while Burke laid his heavy body across the man's chest to smother him. This horrific method left absolutely no external marks, bruises, or broken bones on the body. It allowed them to present a seemingly pristine, unharmed corpse to Dr. Knox. This technique became known in medical and criminal history as Burking. Over the next 10 months, Burke and Hare turned their lodging house into a slaughterhouse. They targeted the most vulnerable members of Edinburgh society: impoverished travelers, homeless women, prostitutes, and elderly beggars. People whose disappearances were unlikely to raise immediate suspicion from the city watch. They murdered at least 16 human beings, dragging their bodies in tea chests through the narrow streets directly to Dr. Knox's lecture hall on Surgeon Square. Knox paid top price for every corpse, rarely asking a single question about where the fresh, warm bodies were coming from. Even when Burke and Hare brought in victims who were well-known local figures in Edinburgh, Knox turned a blind eye. One victim was James Wilson, known locally as Daft Jamie, a gentle, disabled young man loved by the city's residents. When students recognized Jamie's body on the dissection table, Knox publicly denied it was him and began dissecting the face immediately to hide the victim's identity. Shortly after, Burke lured a beautiful young woman named Mary Patterson into the house, suffocated her, and delivered her body while it was still warm. Knox was so impressed by the corpse that he preserved it in alcohol for months to show his students. The killing spree finally came to an end on Halloween night, 1828. Burke invited an elderly Irish woman named Margaret Docherty into the house. Two other lodgers became suspicious of Burke's behavior and noticed Margaret's disappearance the next morning. When they searched the room, they discovered Margaret's lifeless body hidden under a pile of straw at the foot of Burke's bed. They ran straight to the police. The reign of terror was over. The arrest of Burke and Hare exposed a conspiracy that horrified the entire British Empire. But the prosecution faced a massive legal problem. Without eyewitnesses, proving the murders in a court of law was nearly impossible. The Lord Advocate offered William Hare a deal: full immunity from prosecution if he turned King's evidence and testified against his partner. Hare accepted without hesitation, placing the entire weight of 16 brutal murders onto William Burke. In January 1829, William Burke was convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. In a twist of dark, poetic justice, the judge ordered that after his execution, Burke's body should be publicly dissected at the University of Edinburgh, the very fate he had inflicted on so many innocent souls. On January 28, 1829, over 25,000 spectators gathered in the freezing rain to watch Burke hang. Following his dissection, his skeleton was mounted and displayed in the Edinburgh Medical School Museum, where it remains on public view to this day. His skin was stripped and tanned to make leather notebooks, wallets, and card cases. Dr. Robert Knox was never legally charged, but his reputation was permanently destroyed. Enraged mobs attacked his house, breaking his windows, and he was forced to flee Edinburgh in disgrace. The horror of the Burke and Hare murders forced Parliament to act. In 1832, Britain passed the Anatomy Act. This law fundamentally changed medical history by making it legal for unclaimed bodies from workhouses and hospitals to be donated to medical science, while making the buying and selling of human corpses a serious criminal offense overnight. The era of the Resurrection Men was officially dead. Modern medical science, and the anatomical knowledge that saves millions of lives today, was built on a dark foundation of stolen graves and silent murders. If you were captivated by this deep dive into historical dark true crime, hit the like button, subscribe to Midnight Mysteries, and click the notification bell so you never miss a step into the shadows. Leave a comment below. Do you think Dr. Robert Knox should have been hanged alongside Burke? This was Midnight Mysteries. See you in the next video.